So welcome. I appreciate everyone being here. This is the first and inaugural presentation of research and recommendations by American Studies 406, the history and memory of slavery at Trinity College. Can people hear me okay in the mic? All right. I want to start with a few thank yous, though it's a long few, I should be honest with you. First, to the various colleagues across departments that have helped in ways big and small, but especially departments of American Studies, Ed Studies, Political Science, History, the Watkinson Library and Dr. Blyer, the Dean of Faculty's Office, and the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I also want to thank, in particular, Ilda Ramos for making sure we have a space and we have chairs, and thank Danielle Casey, who I've only met via email, so maybe you're here. If you're here, thank you in person. If not, thank you remotely for making sure we got food, and so if you haven't eaten, please do so. And I want to especially thank Veronica, who I just saw, but maybe she checked out. Veronica Zuniga, who basically, if you're here, it's because you saw a flyer that she made, and that's just the beginning of the work she did to put this together. So thank you to all of those people. But last, I want to thank the students of the class who signed up for a totally new class, probably not exactly sure what they were getting into, but nonetheless showed up willing to put in the work every day. I was most impressed, not just with their great research, but also their willingness to look at Trinity's past with an unflinching eye and to place themselves in that story, which is not easy. Right? Asking where we fit into history, especially when it's a history that's a bit messy, can be pretty challenging. So, great work. Even before you present, you're already doing great. But before they present, I do want to start with a brief introduction and a little bit of background context. I am very happy to report that Trinity College has joined the University Studying Slavery Consortium as of this winter. We are a member now of an international organization of colleges and universities doing this kind of work. What is particularly interesting, though, is while this is a growing movement and growing research field, it's mostly Ivy League universities, so places that are larger and older than we, or Southern universities. Both of these categories have much more obvious connections to slavery. What is unique about our opportunity here and at Trinity, as one of the very, very few northern liberal arts colleges doing this kind of research, is that we have an opportunity to look at slavery not just as, not limited to the relationship of the enslavement of one person and their relationship to the person who claims to own them, but as this whole system and structure of politics, race, power, finance, capital, cultural institutions and social institutions like museums, archives, schools, and churches, and how all these things intersect. Though, as we'll see in our very first presentation and some others from there, Trinity is not untouched by the more obvious version of slavery and its history either. Throughout the semester, maybe just for me, I don't know if you all adopted this as a motto, but for me, I adopted as a motto a quote from a Maya Angelou poem she wrote for the inauguration of Bill Clinton, which I'm sure for many in this room feels like a million years ago. She wrote that history, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again. And I should note, there are aspects of the stories we'll tell here today that are wrenching. But it is my hope, and one I think I share with everyone involved, that these histories, faced with courage, can help us engage in meaningful and productive conversations about race, power, and inequality at Trinity, in Hartford, and beyond, with a stronger footing, a bit more evidence, and also a shared sense of past. So, with that, I'm excited to introduce our first panel, after which there'll be a Q&A, a brief break, a second panel, more Q&A, and then a broader discussion. We'll begin with Meg and Carrie. I don't want to tell you what they're presenting on. I'll let them do the big reveal. But we'll bring in Megan, Rachel, and Kat will start us off for the day. So thank you very much.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming. My name is Megan Carey. I'm a senior here at Trinity, And this past semester, I focused my research on Reverend Nathaniel Sheldon Wheaton, who was the second president of Trinity College. This presentation describes the connection that Reverend Nathaniel Wheaton had with Trinity College before, during, and after his presidency, and how his values and actions throughout life may have impacted the Trinity community. Nathaniel Wheaton was born on August 20th, 1792 in Washington, Connecticut. He attended and graduated from Yale in 1814 and went on to pursue education with the Episcopal Church. Wheaton went to Maryland to teach and prepare for his Episcopal priesthood, to which he was ordained by Bishop Kemp in 1818. He returned to Hartford and was elected assistant and then rector of Christ Church in Hartford by Bishop Brownell, who was the first president of Trinity College and a close colleague of Wheaton's. Wheaton played an influential role in the establishment of Washington College. Many academics and religious members in Connecticut did not agree with the introduction of a second college in the state. Wheaton eased these tensions between Washington College and Yale when he wrote his remarks on Washington College and on the considerations suggested by its establishment. This was in response to Alan Goodrich, who was a member of the Yale community who strongly disagreed with the establishment of Washington College. Wheaton was the first secretary of the Board of Trustees, and in 1823, the Board of Trustees sent Wheaton to Europe on a mission to acquire donations for their library and financial support for the new college. Over the course of a year, Wheaton obtained the initial library of Washington College, and today, these nearly 400 titles are known as the Wheaton Collection. Wheaton's dedication to the defense of the college's establishment and his place on the Board of Trustees made him a clear candidate to follow Bishop Brownell's presidency. In October of 1831, Wheaton was appointed the second president of Washington College at a salary of $1,200. During his presidency, the college continued to grow, and the student body at Washington College was far more geographically diverse than its peer institutions. Nearly 1/3 of the students hailed from outside of New England. In 1837, Wheaton decided to resign from his presidency to move to New Orleans to become rector of Christ Church. Much of Wheaton's time down south was dedicated to religion and helping those impacted by the yellow fever epidemic that struck from 1841 to 1843. According to the 1840 census, Wheaton enslaved a man during this time. The only information I was able to find out about this individual was that he was between the age of 36 and 50. This lack of information demonstrates the power of the archive and how little documentation there was on enslaved individuals. I was not even able to find a name. Perhaps his time down south and his direct involvement with slavery sparked a desire to become more proactive in the debate over the institution. In the 1850s, Nathaniel Wheaton returned to Hartford, and under the presidency of John Williams, the trustees appointed him professor of the Institutes and Evidences of Christianity at Trinity. In the 26th volume of the American Colonization Society Journal from 1853, Wheaton's name appears on multiple occasions as both a member and a donor. The American Colonization Society was formed in 1817 and as a controversial alternative to emancipation in the United States. It was rooted in anti-slavery views, which held that free blacks could not be integrated into white America and therefore should be sent to an African colony. Bishop Brownell and at least 3 known students were also involved in the ACS and are listed after Wheaton's name and Trinity College in the journal, showing a clear connection between Trinity and these beliefs. On December 22, 1850, Reverend Wheaton delivered a discourse on St. Paul's epistle to Philemon, exhibiting the duty of citizens of the northern states in regard to the institution of slavery at Christ Church in Hartford, Connecticut. This sermon is laced with pro-slavery rhetoric, focusing on religion as a defense of slavery. Wheaton examines a letter found in the New Testament between Philemon and a Christian apostle, St. Paul. Wheaton continues to express his belief of religion as a means to defend slavery, and specifically the Fugitive Slave Act. These quotes from Wheaton's discourse are disturbing and hard to hear, but they are important in our reflection and exploration of Trinity's past. Wheaton stated, "The inferior race must, by a law which we cannot control, remain under some kind of subordination to the higher intellect of the Anglo-Saxon. Dwell together as equals, the 2 races never can, at least in this country. By no possibility can slavery be suddenly torn out without the most deplorable consequences both to the master and servant. The second quote ties directly to the foundation of the American Colonization Society. This speech was given in Hartford in 1850, just 11 years before the commencement of the Civil War. If he was this open about his racial beliefs, even in his religious practice, what does this say about how he composed himself around his students in the 1850s and those he oversaw as president in the 1830s? The involvement of multiple students during the time in the ACS shows that he did, in fact, include these teachings in his academic classes as well. Wheaton Hall was built in 1966, which is more than 100 years after Wheaton was present in the Trinity community. It is one of the 7 current freshman dorms and was the inspiration of my research. I lived there freshman year. Freshman dorms are part of the identity of the first-year student. It is one of the earliest parts of one's Trinity experience. A college campus should be both a safe space and a living space, meaning that it constantly changes to fit the needs of the community. As a public commemoration project, I recommend a campus discussion on renaming Wheaton Hall. It is necessary to talk about whether a freshman dorm, or any building on this campus for that matter, should be named after a man who defended slavery. Additionally, I recommend adapting the freshman orientation program and the Bantam Network to incorporate more Trinity history in general. Through the listening tours that we conducted here on campus, there is a general consensus that much of Trinity's past is unknown to the overall student population. And with the research conducted in this class, we can begin to expand and add to that conversation. Thank you.
Hi everyone, and thank you for coming. My name is Rachel Brigham. I'm a senior at Trinity. This semester I focused my research on Charles Sigourney and his influence in Hartford and at Trinity College. To begin, Charles Sigourney has left behind a legacy in the state of Connecticut. He is known for being a diplomat, a prosperous Hartford merchant, bank president, college trustee, as well as to some extent to his marriage to Lydia Sigourney. He is a critical figure in the study of the history of Trinity's relationship to social, political, economic, and cultural institutions of slavery. Sigourney is necessary to examine in the search to discover Trinity and Hartford's place in slavery's vast networks. While he did not directly own any enslaved individuals, as a founding member of the college, it is important to try to understand his beliefs and goals for the institution. Trinity College, founded in 1823, was formerly known as Washington College until 1845. Charles Sigourney was one of the first members of the Board of Trustees of the college. As previously said, he is known for all of his roles within the city. Sigourney was born in Boston, Massachusetts, the son of a shipping merchant. While he played many roles in society, the 2 positions that relate to his role at Trinity most are him as a diplomat and banker in Hartford. After his first short marriage to a woman named Jane Carter, Sigourney moved to Hartford. A significant part of Sigourney's life after that was spent with his wife, Lydia. While she was a self-proclaimed abolitionist, Mr. Sigourney's beliefs are not as inherently apparent. Therefore, it has been important to study Mr. Sigourney through his relationship with his wife. She was a published writer at the beginning of their marriage, but sources suggest that her husband opposed her literary pursuits and wished her to stop. She discontinued at least one work over the next decade of their marriage and published several others anonymously. Therefore, some inferences have been made about Sigourney's view on the role of women in education and in the workplace. Further, when Charles died in 1854, no volume was ever written to memorialize his life or death. And it is peculiar that a writer who was often willing to write memorial verses for strangers never wrote a line to note the death of her own husband. Great. Sigourney prepared himself for a role in higher education through his diplomatic network. He sought out guidance for starting a college from President Thomas Jefferson, owner of enslaved people and founder of the University of Virginia. The first correspondence was on July 20th, 1824, where he introduced the recent founding of Washington College in Connecticut. In the letter, it becomes clear that Sigourney viewed Jefferson's University of Virginia as a highly respectable institution and wanted to make his college a similar success. Sigourney referenced funds to an amount slightly over $50,000 by individual donations and otherwise that were procured in order to break ground for the college. He insisted that while the funds for Washington may seem small for an institution aiming to be respectable, they would be sufficient to place Washington amongst the rankings of other New England universities. Sigourney wanted to base course studies, discipline actions, and administration systems off of the University of Virginia. According to Sigourney, there was an unusual striving after improvement in literary education in the United States at this time. He wanted Jefferson's help to identify how to bring a European education to his new college. One of the main points of Jefferson's response letter was to converse about his beliefs on education. Like Sigourney, Jefferson was an advocate of European instruction. It is necessary to recognize that this was Sigourney's educational goal for the college during the founding. Sigourney made a portion of his wealth from his position as president at the Phoenix National Bank. It was the first marble building in Hartford, and it was built in 1817. The Phoenix National Bank had a prominent place on Main Street in Hartford for almost 150 years. The structure of the bank that embodies wealth and Sigourney's position of power at the institution are telling to the greater relationship with slavery. While Sigourney does not have a direct link to slavery himself, nor was he the owner of any enslaved people, he was part of an institution that gave loans to factories that could have had links to slavery. It takes a lot of money to run a bank as well as start a college institution, as Sigourney later did, and many of those funds were tied to slavery during that time period. The system of slavery was inescapable because of finance, among other reasons. And Sigourney's position at Phoenix Bank also serves as an important reminder that Trinity has always been connected to Hartford. Sigourney's role as a learned Hartford businessman and merchant were powerful experiences to have going into his position as a Board of Trustees member at Trinity. This image is from the 1850 census that I found online at Ancestry.com. The Sigourney family is highlighted in yellow. I know it's a little bit hard to see, but the last row names Anne Prince, who was a 54-year-old black female. She joined the Sigourney household in the mid-19th century as a free black woman. Lydia references her fondly in her book, Letters of Life, as an earnest helper, fair and dear to memory. Lydia described her relationship with Prince to be excellent, but in the same text referred to her as a devoted creature, which is troubling racist rhetoric. Still, Lydia wrote, "Her color was no obstacle to my grateful attachment. She was to me as my own flesh and blood." There's no record of Charles Sigourney interacting with Prince or of his relationship with her, but again, we can make inferences through his relationship with Lydia. So in order to understand Trinity's past as it pertains to the present, it is vital to use this research to present a possible way for students to grapple with it in the future. This public commemoration project will focus on memorializing Charles Sigourney, a founding Board of Trustees member, and it will also use him as a window into the Board of Trustees committee at Trinity during that time in general. This could be completed by creating a first-year seminar titled Charles Sigourney, His Influence in Hartford and at Trinity. The first-year seminar could study Sigourney's role at Trinity in its beginning years and likely fall under the History or American Studies departments. Further, it will study key language specific to his role in Hartford, banker, philanthropist, and diplomat. How these roles interact with slavery is important to understanding Trinity and slavery in a first-year seminar setting. The course will seek to understand what those roles may have symbolized and entailed during their time period, with the goal of educating students on Trinity in its starting years. Due to the connection with this seminar and in Hartford, it may be feasible to collaborate with the Community Learning Gateway program with other first-year students. So the burden of raising this conversation to other groups and members of the Trinity community could be tackled together. Thank you.
everyone, my name is Kat McLennan. I'm a junior here at Trinity. Thank you all for being here and for taking the time to listen to all of our research projects. So this semester I researched George Washington Doane, who was the first professor here at Trinity and a religious patron. So a little bit about him. George Washington Doane was born in Trenton, New Jersey in 1799. He was the son of a contractor and a woman of nobility. In 1816, he moved to New York to attend Union College. In 1818, he graduated from Union and shortly thereafter met Thomas Church Brownell, who we know as the first president of Trinity, and that is who led him to his life in ministry. A few years later, he became a priest and started his journey of ministry and teachings. At Trinity, he became a professor of English and writing and later became the bishop of the Episcopal Church in New Jersey. So through my research, I gathered that George Washington Doane lived in and actively supported a society with enslaved people. As a white religious man, he experienced the power and benefits of white superiority during this time. It can be inferred that his social placement and hierarchy influenced the establishment and founding beliefs at Trinity. So, like I said before, it was Thomas Brownell who introduced him to Trinity. He came to Hartford because he wanted to pair his spirituality with the teaching passion that he had. At Trinity, he not only became a professor of writing, but also the chair of his department, so he had direct contact with the first students at Trinity. During the establishment of Trinity, he was also appointed bursar, which meant that he handled all of the finances at Trinity. As you can see from this excerpt found at the Watkinson Library, that was a transcribed biography of Doane. He traveled through the southern states in search of funding for the college. His son later wrote a memoir about his father and described his travels as receiving considerable success in securing subscriptions for the college. Since the southern states are states where slavery thrived, there is a direct correlation between the funding of Trinity and slavery. Doane was extremely passionate about missionary work. He preached many sermons about the necessity of missionary work in other continents and countries. Historically, missionary work was commonly involved in the converting and trading of enslaved people. Through my research of the Episcopalian beliefs in the 1800s, bishops and men of power in the church supported slavery and expressed racist views because there were early scriptural proponents pertaining to pro-slavery beliefs. As you can see from the quote, Doane firmly believed that certain countries were not whole until missionaries came in and converted them. He, as well as other Episcopalian patrons, commonly used racist rhetoric in their sermons to express their concern for the, quote, dreary coasts of Africa in need of missionaries, quote, light bearers. For Doane, his religion was the backbone of his beliefs and expression, and his religion has clear pro-slavery support and arguments, which most likely influenced his role in the establishment of Trinity. In order to understand Trinity's past as it pertains to our present campus climate, it's important to use this research not only to understand and grapple with our history, both good and bad, but to also put that research into action where necessary. I first got interested in Doane as a research subject because he has a large portrait hanging in the Smith House, specifically in the upstairs English room. I believe that taking down the portrait of Doane and replacing it with a portrait of a more recent social activist on campus, for example, Judy Dwarwin, who was the first woman to graduate from Trinity, and someone who has focused on social justice on campus, will better represent our current values. Taking down Doane's portrait will allow members of the Trinity community to understand the impact that masculinity and whiteness has had on this campus from the very beginning. But the replacement will also help celebrate the steps Trinity has taken to move towards a more diverse campus. So the first step would be to reach out to the Smith House and also the ancestors of George Washington Doane, who sold the portrait to Trinity in 1957. I would have to make it clear that the reason why we're taking down the portrait is to celebrate the new diversity that Trinity has had recently. I would then send an email out to the whole campus community explaining the removal of the portrait and also allowing students to elect a new portrait to be submitted to the Smith House. I would then hold a campus meeting discussing the removal and voting on which portrait should replace the one of George Washington Doane in the Smith House and why. And then from the help of the faculty, staff, and students, we could present to the Board of Trustees to have Trinity fully fund the new portrait, as well as the installation and the framing of the portrait.
Thank you to the first set of panelists. We're going to do a Q&A now. Without a sort of roving microphone, I'll just try and repeat and paraphrase your question as best I can. If I get it wrong, let me know. And mostly, I'm interested in what you all think and what they maybe have to say. So any questions? Any thought? Yes. I'm sorry, I don't know like anybody's name, but yes. Please.
Hi, my name is Alicia Jenkins. I'm a Trinity alum. I graduated in 2013. And I just wanted to have a statement. I noticed that all of you presented people who existed on our campus, and you presented a solution to remove them some way, somehow. I don't think that is necessary. I think the only way you remove them is if you recognize the history of this and make sure that American descendant enslaved Black people who are here in Connecticut who go to this school, right, get paid reparations some way, somehow, and make sure you show the people that they sold into slavery and that they participated. The Black people who were sold into slavery by way of building this campus have to be put up with the portraits. Taking it down is erosion and disrespectful to the legacy and history of this nation and how slavery has abused my people, and we are still being abused to this day. And I don't think it should be removed. I think we need to do a real reckoning. Because if you remove it, that means you can't talk about it anymore. Slavery didn't exist, and Connecticut can still be this liberal space where we know damn well, excuse my French, that it's not. So I think it should stay up, and I think we need to do more research into this. Thank you for doing your research, but more needs to be done. And removal is not the end. That's all I have to say.
Thanks for your comments. Does anyone want to respond?
I completely understand and agree with what you're saying. This is really loud. I think throughout our class we examined how other schools handled this incredibly difficult past, and we've talked about difficult histories. We examined how Georgetown University, their programs that they've gone through, and any reparations that they have made. I think that what we kind of were suggesting, I agree that taking it down and removing the discussion isn't necessarily a solution. But I think that more so the overall discussion of why we would even consider taking it down is more so what we were mentioning, like the necessary debate and involving everyone on the campus and informing them on who these people are.
Hi, I'm Eric Dahl in the music department. Just one thing you might want to do is to, because I know we have more art in the campus art collection than is able to be displayed, you might want to investigate what we have in our collection and see if there's any appropriate, not appropriate, but what exists, what alternatives do we already have, how can we continue the conversation rather than commissioning new things to basically create a new history, look at what we already have.
So I was the one that talked about the artwork coming down. I think what I was trying to get at with the removal of his portrait is that we aren't getting rid of his involvement at Trinity or the history of Trinity, but rather the point is that we would replace it with something that represents the more recent cultural shifts that Trinity has had. He was from the 1800s. I mean, there were not women at that we already have, and celebrating that would be a good way to replace that.
And as a step, you may want to find out what is the campus policy for displaying.
Any other questions, thoughts? Yes.
I think Rang's sort of a more easier question, but how did you decide like who you were going to do research on? You mentioned like Wheaton as a first-year hall and you lived there, but what about everybody else? Like, were you assigned somebody, or did you just pick, and what was that process?
I think I chose Charles Sigourney because he was one of those first kind of prominent names when we were going through all these old documents and looking at the first Board of Trustees minutes. His name stood out to me in kind of a weird personal note. When I'm driving to Trinity, I take Sigourney Street as an exit, so his name is always kind of familiar to me.
I chose George Washington Dome because I saw his portrait in the Smith House when I was actually meeting some new American Studies professors. And I was trying to find someone to research, and I realized that he was the exact timeline that we were looking at. And through my research, I found it interesting. His son actually, through his memoir, wrote that the college owes its existence to both Brownell and him, yet Brownell has a huge statue on the quad, and he only has a tiny, or not tiny, it's pretty big, but a portrait in the Smith House, and no one has ever heard of him, so.
And I'll also add just one of the themes of the class, and it seems like a theme that's already emerging here, so we can make sure to keep it in mind as we continue and as we have a conversation afterwards, is, you know, what is the difference between remembering and honoring? Right? So it's not about, at least in my mind, it's not about erasing the memory of people, but it's reckoning with what we do when we celebrate certain aspects of the past. And yeah, maybe that's just something to think of. Any other questions, though? I don't need to be long to it. Okay, so we'll take like a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back with panel number 2. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I hope you stick around. We're going to get started again. Oh, it is on. Great. Don't let me stop you from getting food, though. Enjoy the food. But I do want to get back into the presentations. Today we're going to start with Emma's presentation on Samuel Seabury. We'll move on to Usemi's presentation, then Adosa, and finally Tyler's, before another Q&A, and then some other conversations. Ready?
Yes.
All right.
Hi, my name's Emma Durgan, and I'm a senior here at Trinity. And today I will be focusing my presentation on Samuel Seabury, the first bishop of Connecticut and the man in which Seabury Hall is named after. And I chose to research Seabury Hall because it has been a building which a majority of my American Studies classes have been taught, and because Seabury Hall has served as a focal point of Trinity College. So before I begin this presentation, I just wanted to provide a brief background of Samuel Seabury's life. He was born in Groton, Connecticut on November 30th, 1729. He attended Yale University when he was 15 years old, where he studied philosophy and became a member of high church tradition. He graduated Yale in 1748. Seabury went to the University of Edinburgh from 1752 to 53, where he studied medicine. And on April of 1783, Seabury was asked to become the first bishop of Connecticut, in which he was ordained in November of 1783 in Scotland. Seabury died on February 25th, 1796 in New London, Connecticut. So while Seabury served as a prominent figure for the Episcopal Church, Seabury held many controversial beliefs. Seabury used politics and religion to justify and condone the enslavement of black men, women, and children. And thus, I wanted to provide the audience with some examples of Seabury's works and beliefs that condone slavery. So during the American Revolution, Seabury was a loyalist. Thus, Seabury was both a political as well as religious figure, as I had said previously. And in supporting trade relations with England, Seabury wrote A Westchester Farmer. This was written in response to Alexander Hamilton's full vindication of the measures of Congress, which was written to gain support for the First Continental Congress. And in these letters, Seabury holds contradictory yet very clear political views. Seabury states, "Will you be instrumental in bringing the most abject slavery on yourselves?" in regards to the poor Westchester farmers, alluding to this idea that he's against slavery. Yet Seabury proceeds to criticize Congress in the creation of the Non-Importation, Non-Exportation, and Non-Consumption Agreement, claiming that enacting such laws would exacerbate tensions between America and Britain. In his support of the production of goods within the colonies, in order to continue trade with England, Seabury supported the very institution of slavery, condoning and justifying the productions of goods by enslaved black men and women for the purpose of profit and to benefit his wants and desires. Another example is when Edward Hicks, Samuel Seabury's father-in-law, provided Seabury with a bill of sale for 4 enslaved people. 2 of these 4 enslaved people accompanied Seabury on his journey to Scotland to become an ordained bishop. Hence, Seabury supported the enslavement of the black race for political reasons as well as for his personal benefit. According to Mr. Hicks, Samuel Seabury was a liar and a hypocrite who, as reported by Hicks, stole his land and his enslaved people. Additionally, like Seabury's father-in-law, Connecticut clergymen did not like Seabury, as they felt he was very self-centered and held his own unique political agendas, not for the good of mankind. However, Connecticut clergymen used him to be the first bishop of Connecticut in order to increase their ordination of more priests. Thus, he did not become a bishop for being honorable, but for his connections and for the prosperity of the church. Seabury further demonstrates his views through writing about American slavery. In this writing, as seen on this PowerPoint, Seabury discusses slavery in relation to the law of nature. As you can see in his writing, Seabury explicitly expresses his belief that black people are inherently fit to be slaves, whereas white people, he believes, are created by God to enslave people and rule these enslaved people. Seabury also asserts that everyone has freedoms, whether that is in the position of being enslaved or an enslaver, and that human laws are created to maintain hierarchies and power, which is natural and normal. Furthermore, Seabury states that slavery is justified because it makes profit, and therefore it cannot be critiqued when looked at from an economical viewpoint. Hence, Seabury firmly believed that white people were far superior to black people, and justified the use of slavery to ensure economic prosperity. This information is important to acknowledge for many reasons. Today, Seabury Hall serves as a focal point on campus. Seabury Hall is the photograph depicted on Trinity College packets, or which is greatly posted on the Trinity College Instagram, as depicted on this slide. Seabury Hall, outside of the chapel, is the image that students and alumni think of when they think of Trinity College. Because of this information I have reported and the prominence of Seabury Hall on campus, I've created recommendations I believe would be beneficial for Trinity College to implement in order to create more discussion about race and diversity on campus. This is vital to making Trinity College a more inclusive campus and would ensure that the college does not endorse the same beliefs in which Seabury held. It is in my belief that Trinity should implement a 5-layered program for incoming first-year students. In this program, Trinity should create a video regarding hate speech versus free speech for incoming freshmen, alerting students to what is acceptable speech and what Trinity will not tolerate on campus. This video can also educate incoming students who may not understand the difference between the two and create dialogue on campus. This video should be followed up by a discussion, similar to the bystander intervention held in the Washington room, in which all first-year students must be required to go to in order to continue this conversation of hate speech versus free speech. The freshman and junior required writing assignment should be reflective of race and diversity on Trinity's campus, allowing for students to be engaged, and will provide faculty with the means to evaluate both the views of the current class and assess the impact Trinity has had on students over the course of 2 years. All first-year seminars should visit the Watkinson Library and learn about Trinity's history. And finally, as part of the Trinity academic curriculum, all students should be required to take a class on race and diversity. It is in my belief that for Trinity to move on from its legacy of slavery, it needs to acknowledge its history and must actively address and support a non-racist community. Thank you.
How's everyone doing? Hi. So I guess my first question is, has anyone ever heard of James Williams? I hope so. Okay, has anyone heard of Professor Jim? Great, love it. So the title of this project is kind of an introduction to what this whole research that I've been doing is about. One of the most accessible and most used sources used in reference to James Williams, who is Professor Jim, same person, is the life of James Williams, better known as Professor Jim, for half a century a janitor at Trinity College. And so I would like you guys all to keep that idea in mind as we move along and think about the way that we address people and what we call them and what that has to do with the way that we portray them. So I kind of divvied up my research into 4 parts. The first part was kind of trying to figure out who James Williams is. And then from there, it kind of evolved into a whole other project because I realized I was having a really hard time finding sources that were not necessarily related to Trinity College and that were focused on James Williams and his life and what he was doing with his life outside of Trinity and outside of his relationship with white people or other powerful institutions and powerful people. And so it kind of turned into me figuring out why it is that he was portrayed only in this way or primarily in this way, but also what that means and what it means that it's so difficult to find more information on him. So this is, I'm sorry, it's a bad picture, y'all, I'm sorry. But this is James Williams, and a little bit about him, he was born in approximately 1790, and he died in 1878, which means that he lived to be almost 90. He was born to an enslaved woman in New York and to a freedman, and he was married later on in his life. And these are just bits and pieces of the things that have to do with Williams that don't necessarily have to do with Trinity College. And so one of the major kind of points about him and his life is that he was a founding member of the Hartford African Methodist Episcopal Church, which the original church opened in 1836, and it was reopened later in the 1870s. So the second part of this is thinking about the church and how for Williams that was such a big part of his life, but it wasn't really talked about a lot in the sources that I was able to readily access. And so churches have historically been a space of resistance for activists, for Black activists, in the 60s, Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., the SCLC, etc. And so this was kind of a way that is not really explored in which Williams was able to occupy that kind of space. Probably not explicitly, but in subtle ways, because the way that he's portrayed, he's kind of portrayed as this humble servitor who's not really intelligent or educated based on certain standards that are enforced by a society that is pretty much white supremacist. And the church was incredibly successful, so successful that in 1908 they actually held a mortgage burning party, and they were like, "Oh, we paid off our mortgage, so let's burn it." After we congregate as a community, and so it's interesting to think about the fact that it was such a successful church, but it occupies such a little portion of what the community has access to in terms of learning about Williams. For someone who played such a large role in an incredibly important institution for the Black community in Hartford, for him to be portrayed in a way that is kind of a caricature of what Blackness is, it is very revealing about Trinity and about Trinity students. So the third part of my research that I kind of did was figuring out the ways in which Professor Jim, this kind of character that was like created by Trinity about James Williams, and how that ties into like historical trends and this like paradox of like valuing someone but also demeaning them at the same time. And these are like themes that like go from slavery and thinking about like how black bodies were like commodities and they were objects, right? But they were also valuable and people who like enslavers feared. So Professor Jim, right? That is, a lot of you guys raised your hands when I asked about Professor Jim than when I asked about James Williams. And I think that that is very important in thinking about the ways that like we are kind of taught to think about certain people in our community. And the accounts of Williams that exist and are readily accessible in our like digital repositories and in our archives at Trinity are problematic. And it's mostly because the framework that they use is a framework that just stems from like this legacy of like characterizing black people in a certain way, in a racist way, in a demeaning way. And so some kind of quotes that came from the Trinity Tablet and Ivy were true to like student publications at Trinity in the late 19th, like early 20th century, are that Williams had a relish and appreciation of fun common to his race. What does common to his race mean? I don't know, I'm not a racist. Another quote is, his simple, uncultured wisdom was well heeded. Simple, uncultured wisdom, right? Like, what does that mean? What do these words mean? He's a figure that is respected, and you know, the common narrative is that the title Professor Jim was given out of like respect. But when you think about the way that he's described in these sources, you kind of start to dig into more of thinking critically about the significance of a title like Professor Jim in the context of sources that use language like uncultured wisdom. Is it really respect? Something to think about. And also it's important to think about that the fact that Williams's life in these sources is presented as centered around Trinity College. Even the title of Proctor's work is for half a century, a janitor at Trinity College, and kind of glosses, your introduction to James Williams is Professor Jim and janitor at Trinity College, when he was this person who had a wife and who helped found a church in Hartford. And so the fourth part was thinking about what does it mean that it was so hard to find sources? Like, what do the gaps in information mean? Because sometimes like lack of information is more revealing than the information that's actually present. And so what this whole experience kind of showed to me was that, one, it's representative of the larger exclusion, silencing, and misrepresentation of marginalized people in archive that exists in the context of like historic disenfranchisement and violence and oppression and white supremacy and imperialism. And it is left largely unchallenged. You know, like when we refer to James Williams, even me when I was writing my papers, I would be like Professor Jim and thinking about how we have to like rework the way that we think about people like James Williams, who with their mere presence on campus were resisting during this time period and like beyond. And my final piece is like the public commemoration part. And a really great point was brought up earlier in the audience about like what is a meaningful, tangible way that we can help assist students who, like Williams, are in similar and different ways, are left out of the archives and that are marginalized and that exist like on the fringes of the society, this oppressive society. And so the first part of what I would call the James Williams program is a fund, aid, for students from historically marginalized backgrounds to help with funding for textbooks, not just the one-time grant they have, like actually help with textbooks throughout the course of your stay here. Clothes, coats, flights to study abroad. You know, you can get financial aid to study abroad, but it doesn't cover the flight a lot of times. And so that's a really big obstacle. And just thinking about tangible and meaningful ways that we can use our resources to not only commemorate Williams as we should in proper ways, you know, thinking outside of the context of problematic frameworks, but also help students who also resist in subtle ways by just merely being on this predominantly white institution. And then the other two parts are an education and engagement aspect. So an idea that I had was like to form a committee with Hartford organization and residents and professors and students to create programming centered around how can we as a community and as a pillar of an academic institution that devalues knowledge that is not the dominant power's idea of knowledge. And so one of the ideas I had was like having a common hour talk where we could discuss texts like, have any of you guys heard of like pedagogy of the oppressed? Yeah, so having like a common hour talk where like we would discuss that work and dissect it and think about the ways that we can enforce that kind of framework into the way that we learn and the way that we teach at Trinity. So thank you all for listening.
How do you do it? All right. Good evening, and thank you all for coming. My name is Adoso Nawu, and I'm a senior here at Trinity. For my research project, I chose to research the McCook family and their influence on Trinity's campus during and after their time on campus. Before this assignment was assigned, I never really thought about the buildings we spent most of our days in throughout the week. I walked around mindlessly throughout campus, like without a clue of how it got here or where it all came from. However, through this class, I began to question and look further into the questions behind the stories behind the buildings on Trinity's campus. I initially got the idea for my research project from a composite picture dating back to 1902 in my bedroom. The composite picture consisted of 6 white men, Anton Theodore McCook being one of them. Putting 2 and 2 together, I realized there was a connection between Anton Theodore McCook and the McCook Academic Building. Once I started my research, however, I realized that Anton was not the center of attention at Trinity. Initially searching for evidence of Trinity regarding the McCooks, the information I found told a different story. Rather than a story of bondage, I found a story of military prowess, political clout, and social reform. In my presentation today, I wish to reveal how the McCook family, in particular Professor James James McCook, influenced both Trinity and Hartford in the late 1800s and early 1900s. John James McCook was born in Lindsman, Ohio, on February 2nd, 1853, and he was the youngest member of the the tribe of John. The tribe of John consisted of five sons. Of the 5 sons of Dr. James John McCook, who all served as important military officials in the Union Army during the Civil War. Each son earned the rank higher than general at the time in the Union Army, and including the other half of the family, the tribe of Dan. The tribe of Dan resembled the tribe of John and consisted of 8 sons together, and together they were called the Fighting McCooks, and they were an extremely prominent family in the American Civil War. Graduating from Trinity, John James McCook, graduating from Trinity in 1863, John James McCook was equipped with religious teachings and knowledge that was built into Trinity's curriculum, laced with the mind process of Herodotus, Plato. Sorry.
You got it.
All right. So upon graduating from Trinity, he then attended the Berkeley Divinity School in Middletown, Connecticut, where he developed his mindset and ethical teachings, and later returned to Trinity to apply them to his teachings, with very strict and repetitive, prolonged lectures. McCook ensured that each student in his class would be fluent in the languages he taught. A member of the faculty from 1883 to 1922, John James McCook also had 3 sons who attended Trinity. And were members of the Psi Epsilon fraternity. Philip J. McCook, who graduated in 1895. George Sheldon McCook, who graduated in 1897, and Anthony Theodore Cook, who graduated in 1902. While at Trinity, John James McCook was great at fundraising. After his service on faculty at Trinity from 1883 to 1922, John James McCook was invited to become an executive member of the Board of Trustees with his natural ability to raise money. McCook was deemed the greatest financial benefit of the football team with his efforts to raise about $2,000, which is $50,000 today, to erect the grandstand for Trinity football fans to enjoy home football games. Another example of John James McCook financial accomplishments were involved when Trinity's administration failed to produce $1.1 million towards new buildings and school endowment. With the acknowledgement of McCook's prior financial prowess, the administration appointed him along with Edward F. Waterman as the financial agents of Trinity in October of 1908. And by 1909, McCook had already raised $300,000, which grew to $350,000 by June 1909. Soon, because of his persistence and follow-up calls and to those who hadn't donated, McCook reached about $500,000 in a singular effort. After the final figure was reached, McCook was said to have reached about 595 alumni, 57 undergraduates, 21 states, 2 foreign countries, and 1 U.S. territory, all creating the McCook Endowment Fund, which is extremely important in continuing the existence of Trinity and igniting more fundraising to come. Oh yeah, that was supposed to be the next slide, I guess. So, finalized in the summer of 1953, the McCook Academic Building was constructed next to the Hamden Engineering Laboratory. After $1.5 million was raised, allocated strictly for the purpose of constructing a science building. The building was designed in honor of the McCook family because of their involvement on campus, and with a total of 10 McCook kids passing through Trinity. The following school year, the physics department occupied the first and second floor, and the third floor was reserved for the mathematics department. Both the religion and philosophy departments later relocated in the McCook building from their previous location on 70 Vernon. The McCook Auditorium was also used as a location for many forums for student life on campus. Throughout my research, I've discovered not only was John James McCook a vivacious clergyman, but a devoted professor, but he was also a social reformist. While living in Hartford, McCook was particularly moved by the presence of vagabonds and homelessness in the city. Using his status and family's prowess, he gained access to a meeting of the Common Council where he voiced his complaint. Because of this passionate intrigue in the matter, the council permitted McCook to study the situation and create a report. Although initially viewing homeless and poor with a cynic and distasteful point of view, the study he conducted changed his mind. In and he found the poor-stricken areas of Hartford were unable to progress because they did not receive the help and charity they so desperately needed. With a population of 124,390, about 30% of those live below the poverty line. Hartford about doubles the national poverty rate, that is 14%. According to the graph provided, poverty in Hartford is most common among men and women under the age of 5 and 11, and between the ages of 18 and 34. In my opinion, education can be used as an effective catalyst in shrinking the social and economic gaps. For my public commemoration project, I intend to create a John J. McCook Hartford Youth scholarship program to grant the seniors of each high school in Hartford who obtain above a 3.0 average a full scholarship to Trinity or financial aid from Trinity to the school of their choosing, similar to the Hartford Youth Program, but creating a stronger connection between Hartford and Trinity. Not only will this scholarship give more of Hartford's residents an opportunity of attending college, but the scholarship also forces Trinity to make the direct pipeline from the city to the institution. Trinity continuously uses Hartford to attract students and takes great pride in being the only NESCAC in the urban setting. However, the tall black iron fence surrounding our perimeter, we separate ourselves from this very city we claim. An important aspect of social and economic mobility is education, and through creating a scholarship strictly for the underprivileged, the opportunity is not trumped by wealthy or the more fortunate. With hope, this scholarship will diversify Trinity's student body and also help lower Hartford's poverty rate through enhanced social mobility. I want to create this scholarship because I believe that John James McCook influenced much more than the student body at Trinity. His involvement at Trinity and Hartford helped him craft the many ideas he had towards poverty, and so in return, this scholarship would help Trinity and Hartford craft a translucent and genuine relationship. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tyler Hartmeyer. I'm a senior and an American Studies major, and I chose to research Confederate symbolism at Trinity College, and more specifically, the Confederate flag finial that used to be in the chapel here on campus. So some background info, the Pike Kneeler End was dedicated on November 17, 1957. It was designed by John Taylor, who is chairman of the Fine Arts Department here at Trinity. And it was carved by Irwin Dressel of Dressel's Art Shop. The finial represents Corporal Julian Edward Wood, who served in the Confederate Army and later founded the Pi Kappa Alpha fraternity at the University of Virginia. So during the 1950s and 60s, the U.S. saw an influx in the construction of Confederate statues and monuments as a backlash to the civil rights movement. This Pike PUN represents that era. So these are some primary sources I found in the Watkinson Library. They were sitting in a box in a basement along with all the other PUN information, and each finial has its own folder. So these were in the Pike one. On the left is a letter from Robert Blinn, the Executive Secretary of Pike, and it's written to Dale W. Hartford, who is the Assistant Director of Public Relations at Trinity. Dale W. Hartford wrote an article on the dedication of the pew, which is seen on the lower right, and it was published in the Shield and Diamond, which is Pike's quarterly magazine, in 1958. Robert Blinn writes, "We want to express our appreciation for the outstanding job done by everyone connected with this project. The conception, execution, and article are all excellent." On the right is a letter from John Taylor, who designed the finial, to Erwin Dressel, who executed the carving. Professor Taylor writes, "This is just a line to say that your carving has met with high approval. Everyone who has seen it has expressed admiration, and the general consensus of opinion seems to be that it will take its place well in the chapel." These primary sources show that back in the 50s, there was really no controversy surrounding this pew end. However, 6 years later, in 2017, a large part of the Trinity community realized the chapel was not an appropriate place for the finial. The finial was removed in August of 2017 after Pike alumni reached out to the school expressing opinions on the matter. In an email to Chaplain Reed, one alumni wrote, "What the founders of the National Fraternity fought for before forming Pike is an embarrassment, not a source of pride. That this pew was installed almost 100 years after the Civil War with the Confederate flag prominent has always been troubling to me." Another alumni wrote, "These statues and monuments are not historical markers and should be treated as what they are, symbols of hate and white supremacy. The same logic can and must be applied to the Confederate flag on the Pike pew end." Chaplain Reed consulted with the Chaplains Advisory Group, Pike alumni, and current Pike leadership and determined that they would remove the finial and find a more appropriate place. As of now, it sits in a basket in her office.
Because so many people come in, they want to see this thing, that's why it's in the office. But anyway.
So some Pike alumni felt very strongly about removing the finial from the chapel, while others did not want to create any unnecessary PR on either side of the argument. The Pike president at the time wrote, "We did what we felt was right and best for our chapter. We felt there was a better way to represent the current Pike chapter." As I'm sure you've learned, pretty much all of Pike's founders, either 4 of 6 or 5 of 6, fought for the Confederacy, so the fraternity has that in their history. But in terms of Trinity-specific Pike history, we felt there were better ways to represent it. So for my public commemoration project, I would put the finial in the Watkinson Library in a glass case along with the other primary source materials that I found. So on the left side of the carving would be the before the finial was made. So I would include the letters from the 50s, the Shield and Diamond article, and other primary sources we hopefully will find in the future. In the middle would be the carving in a glass case, and on the right would be the 2017 tripod article. There was a picture of it on the last page. Letters from Trinity alumni who supported removing the carving, and other quotes and sources that we may find. This display will serve as a timeline that will educate students, faculty, administration, and others who know little about the Confederate flag on our campus. This exhibit will be permanent and will hopefully spark conversation regarding history on Trinity's campus. Although students will not be required to visit the exhibit, professors will be strongly encouraged to show their students the display when visiting the Watkinson to discuss archival research. This plan is very attainable as the college has all the necessary tools and resources to achieve this. Displaying the iconography in the Watkinson is not something the college should be ashamed of, but rather acknowledge. We need not ignore our past, but instead embrace it and show the college and the larger community that we are proud of recognizing symbols of hatred and racism. Ridding of the carving would eliminate a big part of Trinity's history, and that's not what I'm looking to do. I intend to spark discussion surrounding the finial and Trinity's involvement with the Civil War, however, in a place more appropriate than the chapel. Not only has this research been beneficial to the Trinity community, but also to larger institutions. We, the Trinity community, have joined in on the movement of removing Confederate statues, and although we are unable to erase history, we must be able to discuss it. Thank you.
So with that, we'll do another round of Q&A, and then have some worksheets for everybody to do, because technically this is class time for me, so I'm going to act like that. But any questions first? Yes,
Question for you.
for me.
I came in late, so
Okay.
you already spoke to it. Can you take us through the idea behind the course and how it worked?
Yeah, that's a very kind question. Did not expect to have to do this much work, but it's okay. Yeah, so the course was something that I thought would be interesting in part because of conversations that had already happened surrounding the Pike Pew that were ongoing on campus, and obviously, in general awareness. I talk about the 19th century all the time, and we see it happening at colleges all over the place, these kinds of questions. And so I thought it would be a really interesting way to teach a class, teach an upper level American Studies seminar, but also make it feel more personal and immediate to students and to the community. I think a lot of folks in the class, we don't know much about the past here, and it's not necessarily anyone's fault. We come in, we leave 4 years later, some of us come back. But I wanted an opportunity to really dig into the past and see our connections to the past and how they resonate into the future and the present. And so really I left it up to students to take the lead. It was designed as a research seminar. I thought it was an important question to ask, but I only had an inkling of the answer. I knew there was enough to run a class, but not exactly what students would find. And so I really put it in the hands of 7 students who I think did a great job. Was there something else you were asking about, or is that I got the gist of it?
You answered my question.
All right. Good. Any questions for me or the presenters? But yeah, mostly.
So I have a question actually for all the presenters. Was there anything that surprised you, or
Well, I think in general for me, it was just the lack of information there is. And I think that was something I went in thinking, oh my God, he's such a prominent man. I'm going to find all this information about him. But that was definitely something left out of my research. There was nothing really I had to go digging to find that he even owned slaves. So I think just like the process of trying to find information and trying to read beyond what is put into words.
I guess mine was the exact opposite. I felt like when I was researching with Cooks, there was so much about military and so much about what they've done in America, and just learn about Trinity. So I had to I was not really shocked, but kind of just disappointed at just the lack of information, I should say.
Most of my research came from having conversations on campus, which is sort of an interesting way to do research and one that I had never really done before. And I was surprised at how many people were willing to talk to me, given that this has been such a controversial topic on our campus, especially given that it was so recent. But I was really surprised that members of Pike, current Pike leadership, other students, faculty, a lot of people have been very willing to talk about it, which is great.
I think what was most surprising to me was, or not surprising but revealing, was that I think I'm fairly comfortable talking about race and talking about, I'm an American Studies major, so pretty much all I do is Black Studies. But it was really revealing to me to see the ways in which myself, my socialization in this society contributed to so many blind spots that I had. I mentioned how I would call James Williams Professor Jim too, but really thinking about the implications of that and without really questioning it. So it was really revealing but also affirming in continuing to rethink about the way that I study and that my peers study.
I'll just sit here. Kind of going off of Emma's point, for my research, I didn't really find that we talked a lot about in class, that smoking gun, oh, he enslaved someone, so that's what I'm going to focus on. So for me, and figuring out how he played a role as a white male in society, even if he didn't own, or even if he didn't enslave someone, he still benefited from the white supremacy in that time. So figuring out how to speak to that.
I have a question about James Williams. I was wondering if you did research into why there's 2 memorials of him on campus. Like, how did that process happen? What were the conversations in the history department? Both of those commemorations are kind of strange in their own way in terms of their location and what they choose to highlight about the story. And just kind of, if you have something to add on that, like the commemoration is itself kind of particular.
Yes. So one of the, I guess like my introduction to the actual paper is talking about how it's strange because there is like there are some forms of like commemoration of James Williams on campus, but they don't really do him justice, I would say. And so particularly the plaque in the, not the cafeteria, like the room with the microwave? The lounge. There's like of the history department, there's like a plaque, and I remember like when Professor Manowitz took us like on a mini field trip to go see it, and one of the first things that like struck me was that it says that he like was like a proud like citizen like of his country or something, like referring to the United States, but also in the same paragraph said that he was born to an enslaved woman, which, as we know, means that he was also born a slave. So it's kind of how is he proud to be like American, which like didn't enjoy any of the benefits of citizenship, so that's like out the window. When he was also born as an enslaved person. So I just kind of found those problematic and didn't really want to like highlight them too much, kind of just critique them and like use them as like a basis for what I want to stray away from in my research, and like the ways that I approach Williams in his life and commemorating that and writing about that like in a research project.
How about at least one question from a student? I feel like it's been a lot of things. Not that I don't appreciate everybody's questions, but yes, thank you.
My question is for Ms. Tyler. I wanted to know if you thought there would be kind of a secondary backlash from putting that biennial in the library, as you suggested. Like, do you think that would just start another, why are we putting it in the library? Like, is that any better than the church?
It might, and I actually did think about that, but my reasoning was, for me, it's all about, like, I think location is so important. Having it displayed in the chapel is supposed to be a sacred place, a place where students can find solace, and there were students on freshman orientation day that would have to sit next to it and stare at it, and, students and other members of the community having to pray next to it, whereas in the Watkinson, it sort of has a different form of representation. It can be studied, it can be talked about, because as I said, I don't think getting rid of it would do any good for the community. I think it needs to be talked about, and I don't think we should ignore it, so I think that is the most appropriate place on campus. But would be curious to see if anyone had any other suggestions.
My name is Gordon Painter. I was in the history department for 40 years and did some other things at the college, and Tyler and I talked on the phone about her project. And I'd like to thank you all for the work you've done. It's a very illuminating afternoon. Just one comment about the flag. I was a senior when that was dedicated. I wasn't at the ceremony. And after Tyler got in touch with me, I checked in the history of the chapel, written by Peter Grant, originally in 1982, revised in 2007. And of course he mentions, he has something on each one of the pewins, but never mentions the flag. And I think that reflects the sort of thoughtlessness, you might say, of including it at the time, which isn't to defend it, it just wasn't thought about. Whereas now, someone goes in, sits down, sees a Confederate flag, wait a minute. So our whole perspective on this has changed, and I think particularly for many people to realize that in so many parts of I was in New Orleans a year ago in March, and the plaza for Robert E. Lee is conspicuous now by his absence, because those were removed. But the awareness, I think nowadays, of what those monuments meant when they were put up. The Trinity case is a little different, but I think with many of these, the idea of putting them somewhere else, you might say for historical and instructional purposes, makes sense, rather than obviously leaving them in their original cases. But anyway, thank you.
Is there going to be any effort to actually work to implement any of these commemorations, or maybe just aspects of them, actually on campus? Like the projects that you guys have done?
Well, with mine, I graduate in 3 weeks, but I definitely like to see something happen, considering that we have all the resources, we have the carving, we have the primary sources, they just need to be printed and stuck in a glass case. So as long as we can convince the Watkinson to display them, I think that it's pretty reasonable to do in the next 3 weeks.
We can make you stay for a little longer.
Thank you.
Also, I think the goal for this class is for the class to continue and for more students to continue this research and to continue research about other parts of campus. So our hope is that if this isn't enacted right away, that eventually students will get to the point where these policies and where suggestions will actually make an impact on campus.
Well, like mine is obviously really big picture. I like to think big picture, I guess. So, like, I guess, like, I obviously don't have the money to start a scholarship. I feel like it starts, like, things like that, big things like that always starts with just conversation, and I just feel like that's what I think needs to be, like, done. So just by talking about it now, you got to thinking about it if you got some money.
This is your alumni project.
Oh, wait, does somebody want to answer? And then we had a question back here.
Sammy, go ahead.
And then,
Thank you.
don't worry, I won't forget you, Councilman.
I feel like people tend to roll their eyes at the thought of reparations for Black people in this country, and I feel like it always seems tangible. Like reparations always seem tangible until you talk about slavery in this country, and I think that it's such an important part because it's on this campus. I think that it would be a meaningful way to actually impact students like who are marginalized and who are disenfranchised. And I think that the things that I mentioned, like Trinity is $72,000 a year, so I'm pretty sure we can find some money for textbooks. And also, I think that the idea of like having more structured conversation about how we can rework the way that we think, I think it's already happening in a lot of classes, and I think that it's partly making it like a system and organized, but also part of it is just like people's willingness to participate in shifting paradigm and shifting the way that we like approach what we study and the way that we think. So.
We have a question in the back.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, I mean, I guess this is an important question, particularly as you graduate and as there are some non-members of color up there presenting on things of race. How do you guys tend to implement the things that you've learned through your research in your lives and in society?
That's an awesome question, thanks.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I definitely recognize on this campus that I'm a white woman, and I think part of it comes from being an American Studies major. In almost every single class, the question of race will come up. not the question, but the conversation around it and how it affects our campus. Recently, we're seeing it a lot more, especially with the conversation surrounding the Churchill Institute. So it's finding a way to have a conversation with marginalized students and understanding where they feel or what they feel on this campus that we as white students don't feel. And figuring out a way to have those conversations and understand them and help them in ways that we probably wouldn't understand without those conversations. I had something else. Yeah, I think, like personally, I'm writing a thesis next year and my focus is going to be on intersectionality because I believe that I should be the one doing that research. I shouldn't have to learn it from students of color at this school. I should go out and learn it myself because it's not their job to tell me about their past and about their marginalization. It's my job to go out and find that.
Well, I feel like through my research, I've been able to engage in a lot deeper conversations with my friends. A lot of them who go here, they're definitely white. So like it's hard to have those conversations out of the blue. It's hard to bring them up. So like when I'm talking about, oh, this is what we're talking about in class today, what do you guys think? It's sort of like a huge debate and like, I'm the only black dude in the room, like, all right, relax guys, it's all good. But at the same time, it like invites people to think about it. Like otherwise we wouldn't think about it go on throughout the day. So I think this class especially and the research that I've done has helped me just communicate race like easier, I guess.
Allison, your question, and then I want to transition to a final.
I just wanted to share that there were, at the time, Pike alumni who were happy to be involved in contributing to a new finial, designing it, and the then current membership were interested in designing. And we did go so far as finding an artist who has the skills to do that particular kind of carving. The reason we didn't proceed was because Pike lost a member, or a recent member of last spring semester, as well as this fall, and it was just not appropriate to persist in that project while they were dealing with those traumas. But those alumni from Pike who reached out to me, and many of them were from Professor Manowitz's era, so we'll be getting back to them about those contributions to that.
So, before people go, I appreciate it. Oh, did you want to say something, Tyler? You sure? Change your mind? Okay. So before people go, I want to thank you for your questions, but also now I have questions for you, or we have questions for you. Some of you may notice them on the boards on the way in, my sort of makeshift easels, but as a number of folks have mentioned during the questions and in some of our responses, is that the goal is and the hope is that these are not just conversations about the past, but these are opportunities for us to look at our present. And so I want to know, the questions are on the board. If you don't want to say them out loud now, you can write them there. I'm also pass these around. You can write them here and hand them in at the end. But I'd also be interested in having a conversation of these 3 sets of questions. So what did you learn today that most surprised you? How did the stories discussed here make you feel about Trinity and Hartford's history, about Trinity and Hartford's present, and what should be done with this research and information? Because this is a living, breathing course, and the part of the reason I wanted to make sure there was a class and not just a final paper or that institutional affiliation with the university studying slavery is so that this has a continued life, and I'm excited that it will. But part of that is it's not just the 8 of us in the classroom, right? It's these conversations, leaving the classroom in spaces like this and then continuing from there. So I'm going to pass these out, but first question was, what did you learn that most surprised you? Second was, how do these make you feel about Trinity's and Hartford's history and its present? And then what should we do with this? You don't have to wait for the sheet to fill it out to answer, but if you have thoughts, communicate them any way you see fit. Or any thoughts? Any thoughts? Yes.
So I think I had 2 thoughts or 2 comments. The first one being not everyone's bad. So I'm surprised about the cook and how suggestions of them starting an emergency fund for students, and maybe you want to take it up to them and have them rename it to what you want it to be and suggest your ideas, because that emergency fund is exactly supposed to cover books and flights for students. Like if a family member dies, they have to suddenly fly home, how can they pay for those kinds of things? So you can maybe take that up to Dr. Davis, and that could be a thing that can actually happen. Yeah.
Any other thoughts on any other questions? Yes. Come around. Come back. You guys let me know.
I think that you guys maybe could like present to the SGA like when there's like all these conversations about like the church group and like protecting Western civilization and whatever, and just like to show like the specific history of like Trinity and our institution partaking in that, and like maybe I doubt it would change their mind, but maybe it would help some other people like learn and just resist the church logo a little more, because it's like directly correlated to us.
So I just wanted to speak to the third question of what should be done with this research and information. And I think it should be archived in the Watkinson. So, and we're gonna be doing a project working with future iterations of this class to preserve the research that's done and make it accessible to the Trinity community through kind of a digital humanities type project. I'm very excited about that. And I think we could also work in an exhibit on definitely with the finial too. That sounds like a good idea.
Anybody else? I should also say there's a forthcoming website. If you go to the website on your programs right now, you will be disappointed by the nothing that you find there. But by the end of the semester, it'll be up, thanks to the help of many folks in the library.
I don't know. I mean, so much of this is about the identifying like landmarks, but it's like it kind of sounds like you could do like a kind of the dark underbelly of Trinity walking tour or something like for campus that like you could do for new faculty orientation or something like that. Because I wanted a walking tour of some sort, and this would be a really fun one.
One of the things that really struck me in your presentations is how quickly a study of this really, really local problem like asks really broad questions like, what is slavery in the state of Connecticut? How are these connected out? So it very quickly becomes a global issue. You know what I mean? Like you start with this little tiny micro set of questions, and then it spins out like the questions that I have, because I know Connecticut has a very strange history with slavery, right? Like for a New England state, it held on to slavery for a really long time. How is that? You know, like all those questions become really quickly huge, you know, like sweeping kinds of questions. You have minstrelsy that you were talking about. You know, like there's so many enormous questions that kind of spin out from this. So I think it's really great.
I just have one comment on that. One thing about I think would be really interesting to implement in the future classes for this is expanding it to Hartford and Connecticut. I wanted to research women in slavery, but there was truly nothing about it pertaining to Trinity. There was a lot about it for Hartford and for Connecticut, but our class was not strictly, but it was really focusing on Trinity. So I think in the future, when this class does continue, it would be really interesting to expand it to Hartford and Connecticut.
I was just wondering, what's the future of this course, and what sort of penetration are you looking for in terms of Trinity students, especially?
I guess that's a question for me. So So I did a quick count. We had at least 80 people here today, which is almost 3 times as many as I expected. So let's start. And I want to thank all of you, and again, a lot of folks just sort of distribute this to the network, so that's great. In terms of the future of the course, the hope is that they'll be taught next year as another American Studies seminar. It'll be ongoing. It's just a question of who. This feels like an awkward time to tell you guys that I'm not going to be here next year. But a lot of other great people will be.
We'll bring it back up.
Yeah. My hope is ultimately for some sort of institutional buy-in, and so most of the other schools that I mentioned in my introduction about where we stand in terms of the research we're doing, most of them are president's commissions, or it's like a whole slew of faculty members who are all doing this research together, and they have a lot of institutional support and buy-in. I think in ways that were sort of both exciting and sometimes challenging, and this was like a very much just like student up kind of class, and so my hope is to create some more longevity around that, and that's why I guess that somebody who already mentioned Dr. Davis in the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Office. They're working with me, and I think the hope is in the future to get some grant funding to create sort of a more stable version of this. But for now, you just have to take more American Studies classes. Yes.
I'm just visiting today, and I'm glad that I was able to visit. I like where you're starting with local, your campus here. But this is a bigger issue. It is a global issue, as somebody mentioned. And if you stop and go back into history, everywhere the settlers went, this is the legacy in every country. It started here with the indigenous people. You go to the islands in the Atlantic, you see the same thing. It's a big history. Maybe you can do more to go back to some of this history. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for sharing your research. So I had a couple of suggestions about implementation. So with the finial, I really like the idea of a display. I think that one way that would be useful, or one thing to consider would be either, accompanying a discussion guide, just so people can appropriately engage with it and just have context. I think having a discussion guide, either especially if there's going to be some sort of digital humanities project online or having printed ones next to the display would be a useful tool. And then the other thing was for the fund. One thing to consider is that Trinity's is starting a capital campaign, and especially if you share some of your research with the context of this fund and seeing it with the alumni office, if they're willing to consider this, especially if you're target alumni of color who would be especially interested in donating, or obviously to the whole entire community would be useful. At Smith College and my alma mater, I was on a committee helping develop a Women of Color emergency fund, and so I definitely think this would resonate with a lot of alumni.
Hello, I'm speaking again. I think that this research, in regards to answering question 3, what should be done with this research and information, I think this research should be used for the case for reparations. And when I talk about reparations, I'm talking about in the United States specifically. Trinity College is located in Hartford, Connecticut, in these United States. I understand that this is a global issue. I get it, with the greatest respect. But we're talking about America, and we're talking about America's rich history with slavery. And with the history of slavery in this country, it does not include POC. It is Black American people who are descendant of enslaved people in this country. Making it a POC thing, making it an emergency fund for people of color, Black people will be ignored in that. And I'm afraid of the disconnect and the disingenuous and the continuing disingenuous disenfranchisement of Black folk on this campus who are descendants of slaves, and even people who are in the city of Hartford who are descendants of Connecticut slaves. Because this, I feel like what you said about the strange history of Connecticut and slavery, I don't think it's strange. I think it's peculiar and interesting. And I think this research can help further to find more Black people that existed in Connecticut during colonial time, during slavery time, during the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, because let's talk about Anne Plato. I find it interesting that you guys didn't mention her in regards to slavery, in regards to the connection to Trinity College. She was one of the first Black people, Black women, to be here as a pupil. And yet there's a fellowship here, yet no one can find where she's buried. I find that interesting, so I feel like this research can help find her and dig her up in relationship to the AME and Professor Jim or Professor James, because she went to their church around the time when he was there. So that's all I have to say about that. Thank you.
I so appreciate your passion and the way that you speak about Black liberation and about thinking about the ways that this campus functions as a mechanism of oppression. I'm a sophomore year, just got here pretty much, and I totally your passion and that your feelings totally resonate with me. However, I would slightly push back on the idea of thinking about support for marginalized students on this campus and kind of limiting it. Limiting it in terms of reparations for African American descendants of slaves, which is super important. I'm Afro-Dominican, so obviously the slavery that happened for my ancestors was in an island in the Atlantic, as one of our audience mentioned. And so, of course, in recognizing that we are talking about America, and that's super important. But I think that what I was thinking about in creating this fund is that they are not necessarily they're not synonymous conversations, but they do exist together. And I think that in thinking about this campus and the way that marginalized students interact with each other, it would be beneficial on Trinity's campus specifically to have a fund that is inclusive of all the folks who are marginalized and fall outside of the society that is white supremacist and that values whiteness and values westernization and all of these things, capitalism and all of these things. So I'm totally here for your case for reparations and thinking about, and your concern about, it was just super valid about Black people, African Americans getting lost kind of in the wave of that. But in the particular instance of Trinity College, I do think it would be more beneficial to think about how we can outreach and assist all marginalized groups, because there is an intersection of identity there. There's Black queer students, there's obviously white queer students, there's students of all these different marginalized backgrounds, and I think offering them support on this campus specifically is cool. I'm mad too low, I don't like the school either.
Any other thoughts or additions or questions or comments?
I just want to take a moment to thank Professor Manovitz for the inspired I think that
become very self-aggrandizing, but I forget. I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to just remind you all that this is the beginning, not the end. And I also want to thank all 7 of the students in the class for doing an excellent job, not just today, but all semester. If you have sheets, why don't you leave them on the table here, please? Or you're welcome to add to the board in the back. Students in 406, reach your adoring fans and then hang out at the end.